I'm Afshin Ratansi, and you're watching another lockdown edition of Going Underground, as Britain, already with the worst coronavirus death toll in Europe, now arguably faces a grave threat to its 1800 Act of Union. As Scottish politics wrestles with independence, the prospect of the first united Ireland in 800 years looms after a Brexit border in the Irish Sea. In part two, we'll talk to the DUP's chief whip in Westminster, Sammy Wilson, about his challenge to Boris Johnson's Brexit. But now, joining me from Dublin is the president of Ireland's most popular party, Sinn Féin, Mary Lou MacDonald, leader of ERA's opposition. Mary Lou, welcome to Going Underground. Before I even get to COVID, Northern Ireland protocols, just tell me what you think of the significance of applications for a judicial review proceedings over the British Army killing of Barney McGuigan on Bloody Sunday, and why Bloody Sunday even resonates there and seemingly not here in the so-called mainstream media.
Well, I think this is just the latest episode in what has been a very, very long campaign for justice for the families of Bloody Sunday in Derry. Bloody Sunday, as you know, was an occasion on which civilians lost their lives at the hands of the British Paras. It wasn't an isolated incident, I should say. Similarly, in Ballymurphy and elsewhere, civilians lost their lives at the hands of British soldiers. But I think the wider significance of this action is the fact that we still have not delivered on the mechanisms that we agreed are necessary to deal with the past, with legacy, as it's called. And obviously, we're a post-conflict society here on this island. We need to move ahead. We need to build a future together. But we also need to deal with the past. And there has been just an extraordinary resistance and almost a belligerence on the part of Boris Johnson and his government, where they have blocked...
Well, I've got to say, Johnson would deny that and says there would be a storm of utter fury if any soldiers were charged over Bloody Sunday, and there's absolutely nothing new for any trial to discover.
Well, you need to allow the courts to discover what they discover and to arrive on their conclusions. I mean, what we had agreed between all of us was a vast array of different mechanisms that would be made available to everyone who suffered in the course of the conflict at the hands of, yes, British soldiers, but also at the hands of Republicans and loyalists. And the objective here is to give families, to give victims and survivors every opportunity, including going to the courts if they wish, to establish for themselves the truth and to establish justice and to give them some level of comfort. I mean, a lot of the laws can never really truthfully be compensated for, but I think it is quite insulting to people from all sides who have been through a really, really vicious conflict and who have suffered grievously, to consistently block the channels that they need and require to get truth and justice. And just remember, the Stormont House Agreement, I mean, it's one of a litany of agreements at this stage between the Irish and the British governments. The British government signed on to allow for all of these mechanisms for truth recovery and for justice. So for Boris Johnson and his administration now to block and frustrate all of that is frankly unforgivable.
Well, as I said, he says there's nothing new there. And is it not ironic that with coronavirus raging around the world, it's the Irish police, isn't it, enforcing the border in Ireland at the moment, even as ERA fails to vaccinate its people compared to Ulster being vaccinated by the British government in London?
Well, my goodness, those are loaded questions. Well, no, in fact, what's happened on the island is, and as I speak to you now from Dublin, we're actually limited to a 5-kilometre zone outside our homes. So the requirement is that nobody leaves unless it is necessary for shopping, or if you have to go to work outside your home. If you're an essential worker, of course, you're exempted. But all of us, not alone can we not cross county boundaries, but in my case, I can't go outside the concrete of Dublin's city. I represent the inner city. So that applies right across the island. We have had a challenge from the beginning of this coronavirus crisis to get a harmonisation and a cohesion across the island to ensure that we have uniformity in the controls and the protections that are administered by Dublin and Belfast. And that's been patchy, to be honest with you. But what has been absolutely clear from day one is that in order to keep any of us safe on this island, we need to keep all of us safe. And the very best possible approach in combating this virus and in rolling out the vaccine is to have an all-Ireland approach. We're a single population, and you will know that for the purposes of animal health in the past, the island has been viewed as a single unit. So for public health, we are a single epidemiological unit, and that's the sensible way to proceed.
But so temporarily, Sinn Féin supports a border between Northern Ireland and what you called Southern Ireland.
No, I think I've just explained to you that
because of coronavirus.
This isn't about, in any event, dealing with this public health emergency isn't about the constitutional question. This is about keeping people safe. This is about saving people's lives. And all of us know that our movement has been, and it looks like will remain, restricted for a number of weeks more in any event.
Some people in Southern Ireland might wish they were in the north, because 400,000 vaccines in Ulster, only 200,000 in the whole of Southern Ireland. Do you put the blame firmly on the coalition government in Dublin?
I think there's been quite wide commentary on the procurement process at a European level. I think even the European Commission has conceded that it had some faults. Look, we want to get as much vaccine as quickly as we can onto the island of Ireland and dispensed efficiently and safely. And, you know, this isn't a time for vaccine envy or vaccine nationalism. I think all of us need to recognise that this is a global phenomenon. And actually, we share now a global challenge to keep each other safe. We cannot afford to have a reservoir of this virus anywhere in the world. If we do have a reservoir of this, and I include in that, forget Ireland and Britain, but I'm talking specifically in the poor south. If that is the case, and if the wealthier nations almost monopolise the vaccine, well, then we are storing up trouble for the whole world. This really is perhaps the most dramatic example of just how interdependent we are as a human race. But to your question, there is a disparity as we're speaking as 20%, regards to
20% versus 3.2% in the south.
Yeah, I'm not defending that. As you know, we're part of the executive, the five-party coalition in the north. I lead the opposition here in Dublin, and yes, we have been critical of the government for the very slow and sometimes confused vaccine rollout that they preside over.
Presumably Boris Johnson would say the vaccine nationalism is coming from Brussels. It was Brussels that was threatening to stop vaccines going to Ulster at one point. Of course, Britain has secured huge amounts of vaccines since then.
Yes, and the talk of that time a couple of weeks ago from the Commission around the possibility of triggering Article 16 was completely wrong. Article 16 was not triggered, nor should it have been. And we certainly now require reassurances. Two wrongs not making a right. Just because the Commission made that mistake does not mean that it should trigger a whole chain reaction from others, including the British government, that would just make everybody's life more difficult. There's no good sense in that.
Of course, the British government denies it has any plans, and there are people who do suspect it wasn't a mistake. I want to get to the hospital waiting lists, because I mean, I had to read the figure twice. I couldn't believe it. 800,000 people in ERA on hospital waiting lists. How do you see Ireland being able to recover, even in the very shortest of terms, from waiting lists of 800,000 because of coronavirus?
Yes, they are. They're shocking. I mean, that's a shocking indictment of a failure, really, for a long time to invest properly in public health. What we need, in short, is we need an Irish National Health Service. We need to invest again heavily in public medicine. In Ireland, we have a confused two-tier public and private system. We have the highest levels of private health insurance anywhere in the world outside of the United States of America. That's the wrong direction of travel. The correct direction of travel is big investment, expansive investment in our public health system. And if clouds have a silver lining, the private facilities and hospitals, their services and capacity were acquired by the state at different junctures. And, you know, there is going to have to be a radical rethink and radical investment in health here in Ireland. And by the way, we're arguing that case day and daily. I know you're shocked by that figure.
A population of 5 million. Of course, the coalition say 4 billion is being pumped into that. I'm not sure how Europe view universal healthcare systems. We do know that an arguable friend of Sinn Féin, Joe Biden, has become president of the United States of America and is fighting universal healthcare all the way. Do you think his election means something significant for a united Ireland?
Well, just on universal healthcare and public medicine, I would regard as a quintessentially European project. I think, and of course, I recognise that the British National Health Service
there are state aid rules which are pretty stringent.
There are. There are, but public health is something that is acknowledged and support. So I would regard that as a quintessentially European value. President Biden's election, of course, is good news for Ireland. He's from Mayo and Louth, respectively. That's where his Irish roots are. I mean, he makes absolutely no secret of his love for this country and his commitment to it. He in common with very, very many others at a very senior level in American public life, he's very committed to the peace process and to all that.
He said, if you're wearing orange, you're not welcome here, when he welcomed Rita O'Hare, formerly of the IRA.
Rita O'Hare, yes. And Rita actually for a long time was our representative in the United States, an extraordinary and outstanding woman, a really, really fascinating woman. You should interview her sometime. I think you'd find her very interesting. I think that comment from President Biden was very much tongue in cheek. There is no doubt. Everyone who cares about Ireland knows, as our national flag demonstrates, it is composed of the green of the Gael and the orange and white in between. It's entente between the two great.
So it's not gold. Okay,
it's orange. It is orange. Yes.
Mary Lou McDonald, I'll stop you there. More from the Leader of the Opposition in Ireland after this short break. Welcome back. I'm still here with the President of Sinn Féin, Mary Lou McDonald. Well, I do want to ask you actually about another Irish-American situation. You were aware that US troops landed at Shannon Airport and broke the COVID restrictions in Éire. Are you convinced that Michael Coveney's assurances are accurate? This won't happen again? Or is Ireland basically a aircraft carrier of the United States?
Well, no, we're not. And Ireland is a military neutral. And there have been very, very serious concerns for quite some time in terms of the use of Shannon and the implications for all of that. Obviously, we have a very tight relationship with the United States. It's almost familial. I mean, there's a lot of us in America. The Irish-American community is massive. It's tens of millions of people, but that should not have happened at Shannon. I think there's more to be said and investigated around it. Simon Coveney has offered those assurances, but certainly we in Sinn Féin and others would be pressing him further to ensure that nobody is breaking the COVID rules and restrictions. That is dangerous and puts jeopardy for public health. But equally, we are sensitive to the fact that we are a military neutral. That's a very, very important aspect of Irish political and
how neutral is Ireland? It was long suspected Ireland was involved in the rendition flights. And why were US military people anyway flying in during coronavirus and staying in hotels in Limerick?
Yeah. Well, those are very good questions, and those are precisely the questions that have been put to government. I mean, Ireland by tradition has been a neutral going way back to the time of Wolfe Tone. It's not a newfangled thing in the Irish perspective. We are a country, as you know, that was colonised by Britain, by yourselves. We suffered dispossession, famine, mass emigration, partition, which is still with us now, almost a century. So we do not share the kind of historical, perhaps, baggage or experience of many of our European neighbours. We're quite distinct in our foreign policy outlook, and I, for one, as a political leader, I believe that it's important that we protect that, because we're never going to be a military power or a hyperpower. We are a small island, an island people. We're outward looking, but we can bring great positivity so long as we are true to who we are and to our experiences, and so long also as we are afforded the space and the support to actually finish our democratic journey. And by that I mean end the partition of our island.
Okay, well, Boris Johnson arguably has given you that. The Irish protocol gave you a border down the Irish Sea. I'm going to speak to the chief whip of the DUP in Westminster, Sammy Wilson, in a moment, who says that there's talk of loyalist attacks on those processing customs claims now, because you seem to have a united Ireland in terms of business.
Well, there can't be threats on anybody going about their daily work. And in fact, some workers were removed from the port at Larne, but they're back now doing their work. And the PSNI, the police service in the north, confirmed that there wasn't any, to their way of thinking, any serious level of threat against these workers. I think what has happened is that unionism in Ulster, Irish unionism, has decided that this protocol, and the protocol, it's important to remember, is in place to protect the all-island economy, to protect the infrastructure of peace on the island. But unionism have decided to use this now as a platform, a political platform, an electoral platform, with an eye to the Assembly elections that are coming up next year. And listen, Sammy Wilson and others are, of course, at liberty and perfectly free in an open society to say what they have to say and to pursue their politics. But just remember this, they were the ones who shouted loudest for Brexit. And while they were doing that, we told them, everybody told them, this was bad news for Ireland. And they know, just as I know, that people in the north of Ireland did not consent to Brexit. As a matter of fact, they voted to remain.
Opposition leader, thank you.